The courtroom was silent. Everyone had their eyes on the judge as he glared down at the quiet teenager standing before him. The boy, whose name was Ethan Walker, had barely spoken a word since stepping into the courtroom. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his messy brown hair covering part of his face, his expression unreadable. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He was just there. Judge Morton, a man known for his sharp tongue and impatience, let out a scoff. He leaned forward, peering down at Ethan like he was looking at something pathetic. Well, the judge said, his voice thick with sarcasm. What do we have here? A young man too afraid to speak? Or maybe you just don't understand what's going on. Laughter erupted from the audience, but Ethan didn't flinch. The judge smirked. Let me guess, you're one of those kids who think they're too smart for everyone, huh? He leaned back, shaking his head. Kids like you end up nowhere. You're wasting everyone's time. Do you even have a brain in that head of yours? Or is it just empty space? A few chuckles echoed in the room, but then Ethan did something unexpected. He slowly lifted his head, locking eyes with Judge Morton, and then he spoke. His voice was calm, steady, but his words made the entire courtroom go silent. Actually, Your Honor, Ethan said, if you're done mocking me, I'd like to correct the mistake in your ruling before an innocent man goes to prison. Judge Morton's face turned pale. The courtroom gasped. The lawyers at the table turned their heads so fast, it was a wonder their necks didn't snap. And that's when everyone realized Ethan Walker wasn't just some quiet teenager. He was a genius. 3 weeks earlier, Ethan was sitting in the back of his classroom at Roosevelt High School, scribbling in his notebook. The other students were laughing, chatting, passing notes to each other. Ethan didn't care. He had long accepted that he didn't fit in. It wasn't that he didn't want friends. It was just that every time he opened his mouth, people either got bored or confused. So he stayed quiet. He spent his time reading books on quantum physics, solving logic puzzles, and hacking into random systems. Not for anything illegal, just to see if he could. But life at home was a different kind of challenge. His mother, Lisa Walker, worked 2 jobs, trying to keep a roof over their heads. His father had walked out years ago, leaving them with nothing but bills and broken promises. Ethan wanted to help, but what could a 16-year-old do? One evening, he was scrolling through legal case files online, something he did for fun. That's when he stumbled upon a court case that made his stomach twist. A man named Daniel Grayson was being charged for a crime he didn't commit. Ethan didn't know Daniel, but the evidence in the case was flawed. The prosecutors had overlooked something. A mistake so small, yet so critical, that it could mean the difference between freedom and life in prison. Ethan stayed up all night, digging deeper. He analyzed documents, checked timestamps, and even accessed court files that weren't supposed to be public. By morning, he had proof. But there was a problem. Who would listen to him? A 16-year-old nobody? For days, Ethan tried to contact lawyers, reporters, anyone who would hear him out. But they all ignored him. Until one desperate call changed everything. Lisa Walker, exhausted from work, barely had the energy to argue when Ethan insisted they visit the courthouse. "This is insane, Ethan," she said, rubbing her temples. "You're not a lawyer. You're a kid." "But I'm right," Ethan replied. "Mom, I can prove it." Against her better judgment, she took him. And that's how Ethan ended up in Judge Morton's courtroom, where a man's fate hung in the balance, where a boy no one took seriously would change everything. But just as Ethan was about to reveal what he had found, the courtroom doors burst open. 2 officers rushed in, their hands on their guns. "Step away from the bench, now," one of them shouted. Ethan froze. His mother gasped. The judge's face went from pale to furious. "What is the meaning of this?" One officer pointed at Ethan. "This kid hacked into the court's database. We have reason to believe he's been accessing classified information illegally." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Ethan's heart pounded. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't the one who should be in trouble. He was trying to stop a mistake, not commit one. But now, instead of proving Daniel Grayson's innocence, Ethan Walker was about to be arrested. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped around Ethan's wrists. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay calm. The courtroom erupted into chaos. His mother shouting, the audience murmuring, the judge slamming his gavel in frustration. Order! Order in the court! Judge Morton barked, his face red with fury. He turned to the officers. What is the meaning of this? You're telling me this boy, this quiet, unremarkable teenager, hacked into government files? Yes, Your Honor. One of the officers confirmed. We received a security alert about an unauthorized breach in the system. Traced it back to this kid's laptop. Lisa Walker was on her feet, her voice shaking. This is a mistake. My son isn't a criminal. He was just trying to help. Ethan, still eerily calm, turned to face the judge. Your Honor, if you'll just let me explain. Silence, the judge roared. He rubbed his temples, clearly trying to process everything. You're telling me you hacked into court records? Ethan took a deep breath. He had a choice. Deny everything and hope they let him go, or admit the truth and risk everything. He chose the truth. Yes, Your Honor. I accessed case files, but not to cause harm. His voice was steady. I found an error in your ruling. If you send Daniel Grayson to prison, you'll be punishing an innocent man. The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Morton hesitated, taken aback by Ethan's confidence. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, folded his arms and scoffed. And what makes you think a teenager knows more than the legal professionals who worked on this case? Ethan turned his head, meeting the man's gaze. Because they made a mistake. And I can prove it. Judge Morton narrowed his eyes. Fine. Since you seem so sure of yourself, tell me, what mistake did I make? Ethan took a deep breath. Your Honor, the case against Daniel Grayson is based on security footage from a bank robbery, he began. The prosecution used a timestamp to place him at the scene, saying he entered the bank at 9:42 a.m. But that footage was tampered with. The prosecutor rolled his eyes. That's ridiculous. Ethan ignored him and continued. The original file was compressed when it was entered as evidence. When that happens, metadata is altered. I ran a forensic analysis on the publicly available copy of the video and found inconsistencies. The judge frowned. What kind of inconsistencies? Ethan's voice was clear and confident. The lighting in the footage. The shadow angles don't match the time of day the video claims to be from. The sun was supposed to be coming from the east at 9:42 a.m., but in the video, it's positioned as if it were almost noon. Someone altered the timestamp. Murmurs spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor turned red. This is absurd. He's just a kid. You expect us to believe he analyzed security footage better than a team of professionals? Ethan didn't flinch. You don't have to believe me. Just pull up the unaltered footage from the bank security system. Compare it to the file submitted to the court. If I'm wrong, I'll take full responsibility. The judge sat back in his chair, studying Ethan with new interest. The arrogance he had shown earlier was gone. Instead, there was something else in his eyes. Something like curiosity. Officer, he said, turning to one of the court bailiffs. Contact the bank and request the original footage. The prosecutor slammed his hands on the table. Your Honor, this is a waste of time. The judge shot him a look. You're the one claiming the evidence is solid. So if this kid is wrong, then you have nothing to worry about, right? The prosecutor clenched his jaw but said nothing. Ethan's mother watched with wide eyes, holding her breath. Minutes later, a court official rushed back in, a laptop in his hands. Your Honor, he said, slightly out of breath. We received a live copy of the bank's unedited footage. Judge Morton leaned forward. Play it. The courtroom held its breath as the official hit play. The black and white video flickered on the screen. It showed the bank's interior. Customers. A few tellers behind the counter. And then the moment of truth. At exactly 9:42 a.m., the doors opened and a man walked in. But it wasn't Daniel Grayson. It was someone else entirely. Gasps filled the room. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. The prosecutor turned pale. Judge Morton's eyes widened. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. Ethan tilted his head slightly. I told you the timestamp was fake. Judge Morton sat there for a moment, his gavel hovering over his desk. Then, slowly, he turned to the prosecutor. I assume you have an explanation for this? The man stammered, his confidence gone. Why, Your Honor, I don't understand how. Judge Morton cut him off with a raised hand. Enough. He exhaled, then turned back to Ethan. You're telling me you figured this out on your own? Ethan nodded. Yes, sir. The judge studied him for a long moment before letting out a low chuckle. Well, I'll be damned, he said again. I've been a judge for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like this. He looked at the officers still standing beside Ethan. Get those cuffs off him. Now. They hesitated for a moment before obeying, unclicking the metal around Ethan's wrists. Ethan rubbed his hands, his skin red from the tight grip of the cuffs. He turned to his mother, who was staring at him like he was a stranger. Judge Morton cleared his throat. I will personally see to it that Daniel Grayson's case is reviewed immediately. As for you, young man, I don't know whether to scold you for hacking into court records or offer you a job. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Ethan just gave a small shrug. I'm not looking for a job, he said. I just didn't want to see an innocent man go to prison. Judge Morton nodded slowly. You've got guts, kid, and one hell of a brain. But before anyone could celebrate, the doors of the courtroom burst open again. A man in a black suit stormed in, his face unreadable. He walked straight toward the judge, whispered something in his ear. And just like that, the judge's expression changed. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of his desk. He turned back to Ethan, his eyes sharper than before. Young man, he said carefully, I need you to come with us. Right now. Ethan frowned. Why? Judge Morton's voice was grave. Because it turns out, you weren't the only one looking at that case. Ethan's stomach dropped. Something was wrong. Something big. And before he could even process it, two more officers stepped forward. And this time, they weren't just here for a misunderstanding. They were here for something much, much worse. Ethan barely had time to react before the two officers flanked him, their expressions unreadable. His mother let out a panicked cry, reaching for him, but one of the officers held up a hand. Ma'am, stay back, the taller one said. Lisa Walker's voice shook. What are you doing? You just cleared him. He didn't do anything wrong. Judge Morton's face was hard, his usual arrogance replaced with something much more serious. He turned to Ethan. Son, you need to come with us. Now. Ethan's brain worked fast. The judge wasn't just being stern. He was being careful. He wasn't yelling or mocking him anymore. That meant whatever was happening, it was bigger than just the courtroom. Ethan met his mother's worried gaze and gave her the smallest nod before turning back to Judge Morton. All right, he said, but you need to tell me what's going on. The man in the black suit, who had whispered in the judge's ear, stepped forward. He had slicked back hair, a perfectly pressed tie, and the kind of blank expression that only came with years of keeping secrets. My name is Agent Carter, he said. I work for the federal government. Ethan's heart skipped. The feds? Agent Carter pulled a small tablet from his coat and swiped through a few images. Then, he turned it around so Ethan could see. Ethan felt the breath leave his lungs. There, on the screen, was a security lock. Not from the courthouse. Not from any local system. It was from the Department of Justice. And Ethan's name was right there. 12 hours earlier, Ethan was in his tiny bedroom, the glow of his laptop the only source of light. He had spent the last few nights obsessed with Daniel Grayson's case, combing through legal documents, security footage, and archived files that most people didn't even know existed. He wasn't trying to break the law. He was just looking for the truth. But when he hacked into the courthouse database, something strange happened. The file he was searching for, Grayson's original case records, had a security tag on it. That wasn't normal. Court records weren't supposed to have that kind of restriction unless they were classified. And yet, every time he tried to access it, the system flagged him. That's when he realized something was off. Someone didn't want this case reviewed. And whoever that was had the power to hide it at the highest level. Ethan had spent the next hour trying to bypass the security alert. He wasn't trying to hide what he was doing. He just wanted to know why this particular case had been marked. Then, suddenly, his screen went black. A single message popped up in red text. Access restricted. Trace initiated. Ethan's stomach had dropped. He had triggered something big. But before he could shut everything down, the power in his entire house flickered. For a full 10 seconds, everything was dark. And when the lights came back on, Ethan knew someone was coming for him. Now, standing in the courtroom, Ethan realized exactly what had happened. This wasn't just about Daniel Grayson. Someone had flagged that case for a reason. And in trying to uncover the truth, Ethan had tripped over something much bigger than he had expected. Agent Carter put the tablet away. "Mr. Walker, you accessed files that belong to the federal government. That's a serious offense." Ethan swallowed, but kept his expression neutral. "I wasn't trying to do anything illegal," he said. "I just wanted to know why an innocent man was being set up." Agent Carter's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's exactly what we need to talk about." Judge Morton stood, rubbing his chin. "Agent Carter, I assume this conversation isn't meant to happen here?" Carter nodded. "We need to move him to a secure location." Lisa Walker stepped in front of Ethan, her hands shaking. "No, you are not taking my son anywhere. He's just a kid." Carter gave her a long look. Then, surprisingly, his voice softened. "Ma'am, I promise you, he's not in trouble, but he's in danger. And if you want to keep him safe, he needs to come with us." "Now." Lisa hesitated. Ethan could see the terror in her eyes. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "Mom," he said gently, "I'll be okay." She shook her head, her breathing shaky. "I don't understand. Why is this happening?" Ethan turned back to Carter. "Yeah, why is this happening?" Carter glanced around the room, then lowered his voice. "Because, kid, the case you just exposed? It wasn't just a mistake." Ethan's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Carter's eyes were dead serious. "I mean, someone wanted Daniel Grayson in prison. And if you found out the truth, that means you just got in the way of something dangerous." Silence. Then, bang. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the courthouse. Screams erupted. People dove for cover. Lisa pulled Ethan down as a second shot rang out. The courtroom doors flew open, and a man in a dark hoodie charged inside, his gun raised. Carter grabbed his radio. "We have a breach. We need backup now." The man with the gun didn't hesitate. He locked eyes with Ethan and ran straight at him. Ethan's body tensed. Someone wanted him silenced. And now, they weren't just trying to arrest him. They were trying to kill him. The world moved in slow motion. Ethan barely had time to react before the gunman lunged toward him. His heart pounded as he ducked, feeling the heat of a bullet whizzing past his ear. The deafening crack of the gunshot rang through the air, followed by panicked screams. "Get down!" Agent Carter bellowed, drawing his weapon in a flash. Lisa Walker clung to Ethan, shielding him with her body. "Ethan," she sobbed. "Stay down, baby, please." But Ethan knew. This wasn't a random attack. This was targeted. Someone wanted him gone. Judge Morton dove behind the bench, cursing under his breath. Court officers scrambled to pull their guns, but the shooter was fast, weaving through the chaos, eyes locked on Ethan. "He's here for me." The realization sent a cold shock through Ethan's spine. The gunman raised his weapon again and fired. At the last second, a strong hand yanked Ethan backward. The bullet shattered the wooden railing where he'd been standing just moments ago. It was Carter. "Move!" the agent barked, pushing Ethan toward the exit. "We're getting out of here now." Two officers tackled the gunman, wrestling him to the ground. The gun clattered across the floor, but Ethan knew it wasn't over. If there was one assassin, there could be more. Carter grabbed Ethan's wrist and dragged him toward the side door of the courtroom. "Get him out of here!" he shouted to another agent, shoving Ethan into the man's arms. Lisa tried to follow, but Carter held her back. "Ma'am, we'll keep him safe. Stay down." Ethan's heart screamed no, but he knew arguing would only slow them down. He was swept into a back hallway, the agent practically carrying him as they ran. The sound of police sirens roared outside the courthouse. Who was that? Ethan gasped between breaths. The agent's grip on his arm tightened. Someone who doesn't want you alive. Minutes later, Ethan was shoved into the back of a black SUV. The doors slammed shut, and the tires screeched as they sped away from the courthouse. Carter climbed into the passenger seat, breathing heavily. He turned to the driver. Any sign of pursuit? All clear, the driver replied. For now. Ethan pressed his palms against the cool leather seat, trying to steady his breathing. Can someone please tell me what's going on? Carter exhaled, rubbing his temples. You don't get it, kid. That wasn't just some random shooter. Someone powerful is watching you. You exposed something bigger than you realize. Ethan clenched his fists. Then tell me what it is. Carter hesitated. He looked at Ethan, studying him for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. Daniel Grayson's case, he said. It wasn't just a setup. It was a cover-up. And you just ripped the lid off something people would kill to keep buried. Ethan swallowed hard. Who? Carter turned in his seat, facing him fully. I don't know yet, but we're about to find out. The SUV sped toward an unknown destination, carrying Ethan deeper into a conspiracy that could either expose the truth or get him killed. And at this point, he wasn't sure which would come first. The SUV sped down the highway, weaving through traffic like a shark cutting through water. Ethan could feel the tension in the air. Carter was on high alert, his eyes flicking to the side mirrors every few seconds, scanning for any sign they were being followed. Ethan's mind raced. Someone had tried to kill him. Not just scare him, not just warn him, kill him. And now he was in a speeding vehicle with a federal agent who might be the only person keeping him alive. Ethan took a deep breath. Where are we going? Carter didn't take his eyes off the road. Somewhere safe. Ethan frowned. That's not an answer. Carter sighed. Kid, you need to understand something. You're in the middle of something way bigger than you realize. The people behind this? They don't play games. Ethan clenched his fists. Then tell me what I stepped into. Carter hesitated. Then, after a long pause, he spoke. The case you cracked, Daniel Grayson's case, it wasn't just a small-time mistake. That case was sealed. And not just by a judge. Ethan's breath caught. Sealed by who? Carter's voice was grave. By someone in the government. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. That doesn't make sense, he said. Why would the government want to frame an innocent man? Carter shook his head. It's not about him. It's about what he saw. Ethan sat up straighter. What do you mean? Carter looked at him. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. Daniel Grayson worked in finance. He wasn't just some random guy. He was an auditor. And 3 months ago, he found something. A discrepancy in federal funds. Millions of dollars missing. Ethan's pulse quickened. Someone was stealing money? Carter nodded. And they didn't want him to talk. Ethan's stomach turned. So they framed him. Made him look like a criminal. Carter exhaled. Exactly. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. His mind was moving 1,000 miles a minute. But if I figured that out, that means whoever set him up knows I know. Carter's silence was all the confirmation Ethan needed. He was in danger. Serious danger. The SUV swerved off the highway onto a secluded road, leading into the woods. A small, worn-out cabin came into view. The driver killed the engine, and Carter turned to Ethan. For now, this is where you stay. Ethan glanced at the cabin. Seriously? A creepy cabin in the middle of nowhere? Carter smirked. What? You expecting a 5-star hotel? Ethan sighed. Fine, but I'm going to need my laptop. Carter raised an eyebrow. For what? Ethan's voice was steady. If someone in the government is behind this, then I'm going to find them. Carter's smirk faded. Kid, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Ethan met his gaze. I think I do. Carter studied him for a moment, then sighed. You're either the smartest kid I've ever met, or the dumbest. Ethan shrugged. Probably both. Carter chuckled, shaking his head. Get inside. I'll get your laptop. Ethan stepped out of the SUV and into the unknown. But one thing was clear. He wasn't running. He was going to fight back. And he was going to expose the truth, no matter what it took. The cabin smelled of old wood and dust. Ethan stepped inside, glancing around. The place was small, just a single room with a bed, a desk, and a rusty stove in the corner. A few maps and papers were scattered across the table, but otherwise, it was empty. Ethan turned to Carter, who locked the door behind them. So, what now? Carter walked to a small cabinet, pulled out a metal box, and placed it on the table. He opened it, revealing a satellite phone, a gun, and a few stacks of files. We lay low, Carter said. At least until I can figure out who's behind this. Ethan crossed his arms. You're telling me to do nothing? That's not happening. Carter gave him a look. Kid, I just pulled you out of a courtroom where someone tried to put a bullet in your head. You don't get to argue with me. Ethan exhaled sharply. He understood the danger, but doing nothing wasn't an option. He walked over to the desk and sat down. If you want me to stay out of trouble, then get me my laptop. Carter sighed. You really think you can out-hack the people we're dealing with? Ethan smirked. I already did once. Carter ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. You're impossible. He grabbed a duffel bag from the floor and tossed it on the bed. Everything you need is in there. Laptop, chargers, burner phone. You do anything stupid, I pull the plug. Ethan unzipped the bag, pulling out his laptop. The familiar glow of the screen felt like home. Carter sat across from him, watching carefully. What's your plan? Ethan's fingers danced across the keyboard. Simple. If Daniel Grayson found something before they framed him, then the records are still out there. I just have to follow the trail. Carter leaned back. And what if you find something they don't want you to see? Ethan didn't hesitate. Then I'll make sure the whole world sees it. 2 hours later, Ethan was deep into the system. He had bypassed 3 firewalls, rerouted his connection through encrypted servers, and was now staring at something that made his breath hitch. A list. Thousands of transactions. Large sums of money moved in and out of private accounts. But the names connected to them weren't just random people. They were government officials. Carter stood behind him, arms crossed. You just found the smoking gun, didn't you? Ethan scrolled through the files, his pulse racing. This is a money laundering operation. Funds being stolen from government programs and funneled into private accounts. It's massive. Carter narrowed his eyes. How far up does it go? Ethan clicked on a file labeled Priority 1. The screen loaded, revealing a single name at the top. Carter sucked in a breath. No way. Ethan's hands tightened into fists. The name on the screen wasn't just some corrupt official. It was someone at the highest level of government. A senator. Carter's voice was low. If this gets out, it could bring down an entire branch of power. Ethan looked up at him, which is why they were willing to kill to keep it buried. Before Carter could respond, the cabin lights flickered. Ethan's screen glitched for a split second. A single warning popped up. You have been detected. Ethan's blood turned ice cold. Carter grabbed his gun. They found us. Outside, the sound of tires screeching on gravel sent a wave of adrenaline through Ethan's body. Headlights cut through the trees. Black SUVs. More than one. Carter moved fast, shoving papers into a bag. We're leaving. Now. Ethan slammed his laptop shut and grabbed the duffel. How did they track us? Carter gritted his teeth. Doesn't matter. Move. The first SUV doors opened. Armed men stepped out, dressed in black tactical gear. No badges. No insignias. They weren't police. They were something worse. Ethan's chest tightened. Whoever they weren't here to arrest him. They were here to erase him. Carter grabbed his arm. We're going out the back. Don't stop running. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. Then, the first bullet shattered the cabin window. They had seconds to escape, and if they didn't move now, they were dead. The bullet tore through the cabin window, sending shards of glass flying across the room. Ethan ducked instinctively, his heart hammering in his chest. Go, Carter shouted. yanking him toward the back door. The second bullet hit the wall near Ethan's head, splintering the wood. There was no more time. Carter shoved open the back door, and they sprinted into the dense forest behind the cabin. The ground was uneven, covered in roots and damp leaves. Ethan struggled to keep up, his breath coming in short gasps. Behind them, voices shouted, "They're on the move. Take them down before they reach the road." A third gunshot rang out, hitting a tree just inches from Ethan's shoulder. He forced himself to move faster. He had no idea where they were going. All he knew was that if they stopped, they were dead. Carter veered to the right, pushing Ethan ahead. "Keep running. Don't look back." Ethan's legs burned, but he didn't stop. He ducked under branches, leaped over fallen logs, and pushed through the thick undergrowth. The sound of boots pounding against the forest floor got closer. "They're gaining on us." Ethan gasped. Carter cursed under his breath. "We need to lose them." They reached a small clearing, and Carter suddenly grabbed Ethan's arm, pulling him down behind a large fallen tree. He placed a finger to his lips. "Stay quiet." Ethan crouched low, his pulse hammering. The men chasing them weren't amateurs. They were professionals, moving in formation, their weapons sweeping through the trees. The voices were close now. They couldn't have gone far. "Sweep the area. They're here somewhere." Ethan held his breath. His laptop was still in the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, but he knew he couldn't use it now. Any sound would give them away. Carter pulled out his handgun and whispered, "If they find us, we fight." Ethan's throat went dry. He wasn't a fighter. He was just a kid who got too curious. But now? Now, he was in the middle of something real. The footsteps grew louder. Ethan's heart pounded. His fingers gripped the rough bark of the tree. The men were just feet away. Then, a voice crackled over a radio. "Pull back. We've got movement near the main road." One of the men hesitated. "Could be a decoy." The radio crackled again. "Doesn't matter. We need to go." There was a long pause. Then, the footsteps started retreating. Ethan didn't move. He barely breathed. Carter stayed still too, gun in hand, watching the figures disappear into the darkness. They waited. 1 minute. 2. Finally, Carter exhaled. "They're gone." Ethan let out a shaky breath. That was close. Carter stood, scanning the area. Too close. He turned to Ethan. "Come on. We need to keep moving." Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. They weren't safe. Not yet. An hour later, they reached a deserted service road. Carter led Ethan to a hidden vehicle, a dark SUV parked under thick brush. Carter popped the trunk and pulled out a fresh set of clothes, tossing them to Ethan. "Put these on." Ethan looked down at himself. His hoodie was torn, his jeans covered in mud. He hadn't realized how much of a mess he was. He changed quickly, then climbed into the passenger seat. Carter slid behind the wheel and started the engine. Ethan turned to him. "Where are we going now?" Carter's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "Somewhere they won't find us." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "And then what?" Carter sighed. "Then we figure out who's behind this." Ethan's mind raced. They had seen the evidence. They knew a senator was involved. But that was just the tip of the iceberg. Who else was part of this? And more importantly, how far would they go to keep their secrets buried? The SUV rumbled down the road, disappearing into the night. Ethan knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. The SUV sliced through the darkness, headlights illuminating the empty road ahead. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, his fingers gripping his laptop. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The attack at the courthouse, the discovery of the senator's name in the files, and the men who had just tried to kill them. His hands trembled slightly. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't a spy or a fugitive. He was just a kid who loved puzzles, who saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Carter noticed his shaking hands. "Breathe, kid," he said. "You freeze up, you die. Stay sharp." Ethan exhaled slowly and tried to steady himself. "Where are we even going?" Carter's jaw clenched. "Safe house. About 50 miles from here. No electronics. No connection. No trace." Ethan frowned. "You don't trust me?" Carter shot him a look. Not the issue. You just hacked into the highest levels of government, and someone found us within minutes. They have eyes everywhere. We go off the grid now. Ethan hated the idea of hiding, but he had to admit, Carter had a point. The people coming after them weren't amateurs. They had resources. They had power. And worst of all, they had no problem killing to protect their secrets. The SUV hit a rough patch of road, bouncing slightly. Ethan tightened his grip on the laptop. So, he said, what's the plan? Carter kept his eyes on the road. We lay low. I make some calls. Figure out who we can trust. Ethan shook his head. That's not good enough. Carter exhaled sharply. Kid, I know you think you're some kind of genius. I am a genius, Ethan interrupted. And I'm telling you, hiding won't fix this. We have the proof. We have the names. We expose them. Carter let out a short laugh. Expose them? To who? You think the news is gonna run with this? You think the cops are gonna arrest a senator? He shook his head. This is bigger than that. Corruption this deep? It has protection. You go to the wrong person, and you'll just make yourself a bigger target. Ethan was silent for a moment. He hated to admit it, but Carter was right. They couldn't just upload the files to the internet and hope for the best. They needed a strategy. Ethan tapped his fingers against his laptop, thinking, what if we find a weak link? Carter glanced at him. What? Ethan sat up straighter. People don't pull off crimes this big alone. If we can find someone connected to the operation, but lower level, someone who's scared, then we flip them, Carter finished, nodding slowly. Get them to talk. Ethan smirked. Exactly. Carter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're dangerous, kid. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Because I'm smart? Carter shook his head. Because you don't know when to stop. Ethan just stared ahead. Stopping wasn't an option. Not anymore. An hour later, the SUV pulled into a remote gas station on a deserted stretch of road. The only light came from a flickering neon sign and the dim glow of a security camera above the door. Carter shut off the engine. Stay here. I'll grab supplies. Ethan nodded, watching as Carter stepped out of the car and walked toward the store. The moment he was alone, Ethan opened his laptop and got to work. He wasn't waiting around. If they were going to flip someone inside this operation, they needed to know who to target. His fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up encrypted files. He scrolled past the senator's transactions, looking for something, anything, that stood out. Then he saw it. A name. Jacob Finch. Ethan clicked on it. A small profile popped up. Finch was a mid-level government contractor, tied to financial accounts used in the laundering scheme. He wasn't at the top, but he was close enough to know the real players. And there was something else. Ethan's eyes widened. He tried to back out. A series of flagged transactions showed Finch moving money, shifting assets, trying to disappear. He was scared. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it. Finch wanted out. Which meant, if they got to him first, they had a shot. Ethan reached for his burner phone. He needed to tell Carter. Then he saw the reflection in the window. A shadow moving toward the SUV. His stomach dropped. Someone was behind him, and before he could even turn, a hand slammed over his mouth. The door yanked open. Ethan struggled, kicking wildly, but whoever it was, they were strong. He was pulled from the SUV and thrown into the darkness. Ethan hit the ground hard, his head slamming against the rough gravel. Stars exploded in his vision, and for a brief second, he felt completely disoriented. But he didn't have time to recover. A strong hand grabbed him by the collar and yanked him up. A voice, low, sharp, hissed in his ear. Stop fighting. Ethan ignored the command, twisting and thrashing with everything he had. He kicked at his attacker's shin, but they barely flinched. A second figure appeared from the shadows. This one pressed a gun against Ethan's ribs. Do it again, and you won't get another chance, the second voice warned. Ethan froze. The first man, still gripping him tightly, leaned in. You've been a very busy little hacker, haven't you? Ethan clenched his teeth. He could smell cigarettes and sweat on the guy's breath. Whoever these men were, They weren't ordinary thugs. They were professionals. The second man grabbed Ethan's laptop bag from the SUV, slinging it over his shoulder. "Where's your babysitter?" "Carter." Ethan's heart pounded. Carter was still inside the gas station. If these guys had been watching them, they would have seen Carter go in alone. That meant they waited for the perfect moment to grab me. The first man shoved Ethan toward a black sedan parked in the alley beside the station. "Get in." Ethan hesitated. The second man jabbed the gun harder into his ribs. I said, "Get in." Ethan didn't have a choice. He climbed into the back seat, his brain racing for a way out. The first man slid in beside him, and the second took the driver's seat. The doors locked with a click, and then they sped off into the night. 5 minutes. That's how long Ethan sat in silence, trying to memorize every turn, every street sign, anything that could tell him where they were going. The man next to him finally spoke. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Who are you?" The man smirked. "That's not important." Ethan glanced at the driver. "You work for the senator?" The man's smirk vanished. "Shut up." Bingo. Ethan had hit a nerve. These men weren't just random kidnappers. They were connected to the corruption he had uncovered, which meant they weren't planning on letting him go. Ethan took a slow breath. He needed to stay calm. If he panicked, he'd make a mistake. His eyes flicked to his laptop bag on the floor by the driver's seat. If he could get to it. The car suddenly jerked, tires screeching as the driver slammed on the brakes. A black SUV blocked the road ahead. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Carter." Before the driver could react, the SUV's door flew open, and Carter stepped out, gun raised, eyes burning with fury. "Let him go." Carter's voice was cold, lethal. The man beside Ethan pulled out a pistol, shoving it against Ethan's temple. Carter's jaw tightened. "I don't think you understand," the man sneered. "You lower that gun, or the kid gets a bullet." Ethan's breath came fast. His mind raced for a way out. Then, Carter did something unexpected. He smirked. The driver's eyes darted to the rearview mirror, suddenly suspicious. "What's so funny?" Carter tilted his head slightly. "You boys brought a gun to a fight you already lost." The men barely had time to process those words before a second SUV slammed into them from behind. The impact sent the car spinning. The man next to Ethan lost his grip, and Ethan acted instantly. He lunged for his laptop bag. The driver cursed, struggling to regain control. And then Carter was there, yanking open the door and ripping Ethan out just as the second SUV screeched to a stop beside them. More men poured out, but these weren't enemies. They were agents. Carter had backup. Gunfire erupted. Carter shoved Ethan behind the SUV. "Stay down." Ethan barely had time to process before he heard the distinct pop, pop, pop of silenced gunfire. The men who had taken him were outnumbered. And within seconds, it was over. The attackers were neutralized. The only sound left was Ethan's pounding heart. Carter turned to him, gripping his shoulder. "You okay?" Ethan nodded, breathing hard. "You set me up." Carter smirked. "I had a feeling they'd come for you. Just needed to make sure I'd be there when they did." Ethan stared at him. "You used me as bait?" Carter shrugged. "And it worked." Ethan couldn't decide whether he was angry or impressed. One of the agents from the second SUV approached. "We need to move. Now." Carter nodded and turned to Ethan. "Come on, kid. We're not done yet." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew what Carter meant. This was just the beginning. And now, they were going straight to the source. Straight to the senator. The black SUVs tore down the highway at full speed, weaving between cars as if the laws of the road didn't apply. Ethan sat in the back, his laptop balanced on his knees, fingers flying over the keyboard. They had the advantage now. They had the files. They had proof. And most importantly, they had names. But there was still one major problem. None of it mattered unless they could bring down the senator. Carter, in the passenger seat, was making rapid calls, his voice sharp. "No, we don't go public yet. We need a direct approach. If we don't cut off the head, they'll bury this." Ethan swallowed hard. He understood what Carter meant. If they just leaked the information, the people behind the senator would shut it down, twist the story, or make it disappear. They needed to corner him. We need to get to him before he knows we have this, Ethan said. Carter nodded. Already working on it. The driver, a serious-looking agent with sharp eyes, spoke up. We got a problem. Carter stiffened. What? The agent handed him a tablet. On the screen, a breaking news alert flashed in bold red letters. Teen hacker wanted for cybercrimes. FBI issues arrest warrant. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Carter cursed under his breath. They're flipping it on you. Ethan's stomach churned as he read the article. They had painted him as a dangerous cybercriminal who had hacked into classified government systems. The news was calling him an immediate national security threat. And worse, they tied Carter to him. Carter's face was grim. This is bad. The agent driving nodded. We're losing ground. They'll have orders to detain on sight. Ethan clenched his fists. This was exactly what he feared. They weren't just trying to silence him. They were making sure no one would believe him. They're cutting off our options, Carter muttered. Ethan took a deep breath. Then we only have one move left. Carter glanced at him. Which is? Ethan's fingers tightened around the laptop. We trapped the senator. Carter raised an eyebrow. You got a plan, kid? Ethan exhaled. Yeah, but it's risky. Carter smirked. Risky is what we do. 30 minutes later, they pulled into a private airfield. A sleek black jet sat on the runway, engines humming. Agents moved swiftly, prepping for takeoff. Ethan turned to Carter, confused. Where are we going? Carter tightened his grip on his gun. Washington, D.C. Ethan's stomach twisted. They were going straight into the lion's den. Before he could say anything, Carter grabbed his arm. Listen up, kid. The second we land, this gets real. No more games. No more running. We hit hard. We hit fast. And we don't stop until the truth is out. Ethan nodded, forcing down the fear bubbling inside him. They climbed the stairs into the jet, and within minutes, they were airborne. Ethan opened his laptop and pulled up the files. There was one last piece of the puzzle he needed to crack. And if he was right, it would be the final nail in the senator's coffin. He took a deep breath and started typing. They were heading straight into danger. And there was no turning back now. The jet soared through the night sky, slicing through thick clouds as they approached Washington, D.C. The tension in the cabin was suffocating. Ethan's fingers danced across the keyboard, his mind moving faster than it ever had before. He wasn't just hacking now, he was building a trap. Carter sat beside him, watching carefully. What exactly are you doing, kid? Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the screen. Setting up the end game. He pulled up the senator's financial records again, but this time, he wasn't just looking at the stolen money. He was looking at who was receiving it. And then, he found it. His breath hitched. Carter leaned in. What is it? Ethan swallowed hard. The money isn't just going into offshore accounts. Some of it is coming back. Carter frowned. Explain. Ethan exhaled. It's being funneled through shell companies, fake businesses, and then it's being used for something big. He clicked on one of the flagged transactions. A series of payments, massive amounts of money. And the recipient? A private security firm. Carter's expression darkened. That's not just laundering. That's building an army. Ethan's stomach twisted. He's not just stealing money. He's paying for something. Weapons. Men. Operations. Something off the books. Carter ran a hand down his face. This is worse than I thought. Ethan nodded. We're not just exposing corruption anymore. His eyes met Carter's. We're stopping a coup. 1 hour later, the jet touched down at a private airstrip outside Washington, D.C. The moment the wheels hit the ground, the team was already in motion. Carter loaded his gun. We don't have much time. The second they realize we're here, they'll move to shut this down. Ethan nodded. We need to get close to the senator. Somewhere public, where they can't just kill us. Carter thought for a moment. Then his eyes lit up. The gala. Ethan frowned. What gala? Carter pulled out his phone and showed him an article. Tonight, Senator Richardson to speak at charity event in D.C. Ethan's pulse spiked. The senator was going to be in public, in front of hundreds of people. It was the perfect chance. Ethan shut his laptop. Then we go to the gala. Carter smirked. One problem, kid. You don't exactly blend in at high-class events. Ethan exhaled. Then I guess it's time for a makeover. 1 hour later, Ethan stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the cuffs of a stolen tuxedo. This is stupid, he muttered. Carter, fixing his own tie, smirked. Relax, kid. You almost look normal. Ethan rolled his eyes. What's the plan? Carter's face grew serious. You get in, stick to the plan, and don't get caught. Ethan nodded. Right. Carter glanced at his watch. It's almost showtime. Ethan took a deep breath. This was it. The final move. And if they pulled this off, the senator was finished. They stepped into the grand ballroom, chandeliers glittering overhead. The room was filled with politicians, businessmen, and high-profile guests. Everyone was smiling, laughing, completely clueless about what was about to happen. Ethan's eyes scanned the crowd, and then he saw him, Senator Richardson, standing at the center of the room, shaking hands, laughing, completely unaware that his empire was about to crumble. Ethan's heart pounded. It was time. He pulled out his phone, clicked a button, and sent the files to every major news outlet in the country. But before he could even breathe, a firm hand grabbed his shoulder. His blood ran cold. He turned and found himself face to face with a man in black. No expression, no hesitation, just deadly intent. The man whispered, "You shouldn't have come here, kid." Ethan barely had time to react before the man reached inside his jacket and pulled out a gun. Ethan's world slowed. The man in black pulled his gun with surgical precision, his grip steady, too steady. A professional. Ethan's body froze, his mind screaming at him to move, but he was locked in place, staring down the barrel of a silencer. Then, bang. But it wasn't from the assassin's gun. The man's body jerked violently, a bullet slamming into his chest. His grip loosened, and his weapon clattered to the marble floor. Ethan barely had time to register what happened before a strong hand yanked him backward. "Carter, move," he barked. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests screamed, ducking for cover. Security rushed in, their guns drawn, looking for the source of the gunfire. Ethan's heart pounded. Who shot him? Carter didn't answer. He was already scanning the room, searching for their next move. But then, a new voice echoed over the ballroom speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," it was the senator. Ethan's head snapped toward the grand stage. There he was, Senator Richardson, standing at the podium, calm, composed. His cold blue eyes locked onto Ethan through the crowd. A slow smirk formed on his lips. Ethan's stomach dropped. He knows. Richardson adjusted his tie. "Apologies for the disturbance," he said smoothly, as if nothing had happened. "It seems we have a trespasser." Carter cursed under his breath. "We need to get out. Now." Ethan shook his head. No, his hands curled into fists. "We're finishing this." Carter gave him a sharp look. "Kid, we don't have backup." Ethan's pulse thundered. "We don't need it." He took a deep breath, then stepped forward. The senator raised an eyebrow as Ethan emerged from the crowd. The prodigy himself." The room went dead silent. Security guards surrounded the stage, their hands resting on their holsters. Ethan ignored them. He pulled out his phone, holding it up for everyone to see. Richardson's smirk didn't falter. "You think a phone is going to stop me?" Ethan smiled. "Not just a phone." He tapped the screen, and suddenly, every screen in the ballroom flickered to life. Projectors, TVs, smartphones, tablets, all of them. And on every single screen, the evidence played. Documents, video clips, bank statements, leaked recordings. The truth in full color, for every guest, reporter, and politician in the room to see. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. A man near the front of the room dropped his champagne glass. A reporter clutched her earpiece, already relaying the breaking news to her station. Ethan's voice was calm. "This," he said, gesturing to the screens, is who you really are. The senator's face darkened. For the first time, he looked rattled. Carter stepped beside Ethan. Looks like the whole country just saw what you've been hiding. The senator's jaw tightened. He turned to his security team. Arrest him. But no one moved. Because now, the cameras were on him. The world was watching. Any wrong move would only confirm his guilt. Richardson's fists clenched, his breathing slow and controlled. Then, his lips curled into a chilling smile. He leaned slightly toward Ethan and whispered, so only he could hear. "You don't understand, kid." His voice was soft, but deadly. "Men like me? We don't go to prison." Ethan's eyes burned into him. "You will." And then, FBI agents swarmed the room. Voices shouted, "Senator Richardson, you're under arrest." The senator barely reacted as the cuffs clicked around his wrists. His expression remained calm, but his eyes? They burned with pure hatred. As he was dragged away, he whispered one final warning. "This isn't over." Ethan didn't flinch. "Yes, it is," he said. Richardson was gone. And just like that, it was over. Hours later, Ethan and Carter stood outside the Capitol building, watching the sunrise. The world had changed overnight. News outlets were running the story. The government was in turmoil. Investigations were opening. The truth was finally out. Ethan let out a deep breath. "So, what happens now?" Carter smirked. "Now? You go home." Ethan blinked. "Just like that?" Carter shrugged. "You did your part. You took down one of the most powerful men in the country." He smiled slightly. "Not bad for a kid." Ethan exhaled. "Yeah, not bad." He turned to Carter. "And you? What happens to you?" Carter chuckled. "Me? I'll be fine. I always am." Ethan nodded. He knew they'd probably never see each other again. But that was okay. Because now, Ethan Walker was free. Free from fear. Free from running. Free to finally be himself. As he walked away, the sun rising behind him, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just the quiet kid in the back of the class anymore. He was the kid who had changed everything. And that was just the beginning.